And in politics, I'm sure we'll be talking about the local government reform that has been flagged with our commentators. But we might begin with Labour's rather upbeat conference at the weekend. A very good morning, kia ora kōrua to Liam Hehir and Lianne Dalziel.
Kia ora.
Tēnā kōrua.
Liam is a Palmerston North lawyer, political commentator and a member of the National Party. Lianne Dalziel is a life member of the Labour Party and a former MP and Cabinet Minister. She ran as an independent for Christchurch Mayoralty in 2013 and was the city's mayor for 3 terms. She's now a regular columnist for newsroom.co.nz. OK, let's start with the Labour Party conference. They had reasons to be upbeat, Lianne. What did you take of the way the conference ran, the way it used this opportunity of spotlight?
Well, I think that the Labour Party will be very pleased with the conference and the response that it's had. It's all been very upbeat and very positive. I've spoken to 2 or 3 people who've been at the conference over the weekend, and they felt that it was very exciting, very stimulating, and that there was a real buzz, a real energy in the room that they hadn't felt for some time. And so a generally positive conference and a reaction to it.
Liam?
Yeah, I mean, I think it indicates, this isn't the United States. The major party conventions or conferences aren't these huge political events. But when the vibe is positive and the tone is positive, even when the sort of the vision is sort of quite moderated, it does show that the party itself considers that it's in with a sniff, which is, again, extraordinary given its first term in opposition. So, it's a small sign of health. But a welcome one for Labour, and there's just no getting around the fact that it's going to be a very close election, and that's a great motivator for the party.
Interestingly, Anne, that it has been observed as making itself a very small target, Labour. It's basically just, one could argue, kept fairly low profile, hasn't chased barked after every passing car, and has let the government's own unpopularity and the pressures of the cost of living, etc., do their thing. We've seen that gap between the centre-left and centre-right close right up. Are they going to get to a point, and is this the start of a point, where they have to start talking and looking like a replacement government? They can't just play the low-key, low-target game.
Well, I think this conference really was the start of that. I mean, I noted Liam's comment about this being their first term in opposition and, ostensibly National's first term in government. But I went back and sort of reflected on the time that I got elected to Parliament in 1990, where National won 48% of the vote and 67% of the seats. That was the reality of first past the post. The 1993 election, and we were decimated in 1990. In 1993, National won 35% of the vote, Labour won 34% of the vote, the Alliance won 18%, and New Zealand First won 8%. Now, under MMP, that would have been a change of government after one term. And actually, if you reflect back to 1978, Muldoon would have lost the election in 1978 after one term. I think Labour's starting to realise that this is possible, and National, I think, is starting to realise that this is possible as well.
What will it take, Liam, to build not only the centre-left bloc, but to sort of cement where some of the polls are starting to place Labour? They have the issues that Hipkins is very much of the pandemic government, and there wasn't a lot from the reporting I've seen. There wasn't a lot of evidence of the leaders of that government or the presence of them even at the conference. So, like most of the country, they're possibly wanting to put that in the rearview mirror. Has Hipkins successfully migrated from that memory into a pretty secure position as leader and putting forward a new image?
Well, I think it amounts to the same thing, which is that they're doing the smart move, right? I mean, there's other baggage apart from the COVID vaccine. There's also the hangover, their financial hangover of their time in office. But that's only really a problem if you come out trying to hit sixes. And if you just hit singles and twos, which is what Hipkins essentially is doing, then you keep all the focus back on the incumbent government. It's not inspiring, but it's smart. I mean, Hipkins is a capable politician. He's not a Jacinda Ardern or a Barack Obama, so it would be a mistake to come and try and grab the spotlight in that way. Instead, play to your strengths, play to the strengths and the weaknesses of your opponent, and that's exactly what they're doing. If Hipkins was to run a more aggressive campaign, putting himself front and centre, rather than letting National have to defend itself, then he's also going to invite questions about the MMP dynamic, about where Te Pāti Māori sits in all this. And given that at the conference, Hipkins did mention that no one's talking to it in St. Peter's, it looks like it's going to have to be Te Pāti Māori as part of any governing bloc. And given how politically toxic that is to the middle voters, it's this absolutely smart move, which is just to be upbeat and small and hit the singles, hit the twos. Don't try to hit the sixes.
Interesting point, Lianne, because, of course, one of the criticisms of the previous government, in fact, one of the things some senior players will admit, was that they had far too ambitious in a program, and far too much of it was never delivered. And so is Liam's point right? There's an acceptance, and will there be an acceptance within the party to have a simpler, more focused manifesto?
I think that makes considerable sense. I mean, I go back to the 1990 to 1993 election campaign. Between 1990 and 1993, we ran a Labour listens, Labour learns, Labour leads approach, which enabled us to really reflect again on what people were saying, what they said about our previous time in office, what we had learned from that, and also learned from overseas, other jurisdictions as well. And then the idea of Labour being in a position to lead and establishing themselves as an alternative government. Now, that was first past the post. Under this one, I think the challenge will be the coalition arrangements, as Liam has said, with Te Pāti Māori in a difficult position at the moment. And I'm hoping that within a period of time that we are able to see how that then plays out, because I don't know that story is over yet. I think that there's still quite a bit of water to go under the bridge.
It will be the singular challenge in some ways, the biggest challenge in some ways that Labour faces as to whether it can make that centre-left government option look credible to the wider electorate. The other interesting point here, Kieran McAnulty, who seems to be their key election strategist, almost publicly telling his own people, stay focused on the things that matter, stay focused on the things that people are worried about, particularly cost of living, keep focus there. On that note, however, what are they going to do about any more tax? Is that still a live issue also, do we feel, within the party as to whether the capital gains tax on second housing is the extent of it, or are they going to have to, and especially in any credible financial plan, have to dig deeper, Lianne?
Well, I felt that they dealt with that at the last conference, and I mean, I wasn't at the conference, so obviously I didn't hear the sort of chitter-chatter in between the sessions. But what I'm told by people who were there is that there is a degree of comfort and to the point where they got to, and now they're focused on what are the key issues that the public really want them to be talking about. And they are cost of living, they are health, and they are housing, those sorts of fundamental issues that are really important to the general public.
Yeah. The resolution of the pay equity, which of course saved the incumbent government billions, in inverted commas, saved it billions in terms of its forward budget, remains unresolved. And even with health, Liam, it was interesting, this announcement was fairly focused, offering doctors and nurse practitioners low interest loans to set up new practices or buy into existing ones. The cynic in me says, I've been talking to health leaders for years, GP leaders for years, saying the real issue is trying to make that business break even. So why would you, if you're not going to deal with capitation funding, who's going to rush in to buy into practices? No big promise on capitation funding or big injection for health. Something quite focused and targeted got announced, Liam.
Yeah, well, I think it's a template of how it's going to go, right? And it's the same for taxation. So the Labor's swung between two. They've tried two approaches that have both failed. So they've tried the approach of being really detailed in their tax policies and their policies, and then having the costs thrown at them, or having them being attacked over the details where it doesn't work. That didn't work in around that sort of 2011, 2014 era. And then in 2017-20, they tried the approach of actually just making big promises but being very, very vague on how they were going to deliver it, and kicking that off to, one of, innumerable working groups. And that didn't work because, of course, while that was happening, you ceded all the ground to your opponents to be able to speculate on what you were going to do. And then, so what we've got now, which I think is the approach that is the correct approach to take politically, and probably the better one to be able to deliver on, is to actually, just targeted approaches, continuous improvement, make things a little bit better each time, or promise to anyway. Whether or not it does or not, that's another question. But promise to make things a little bit better. If Labour wins this election, it's going to kind of be winning by default, right? And a win by default is still a win.
Just before we come, I want to spend plenty of time on local government reforms. But just before we come to that, I just want to get your take on the sort of could have, might have been a little bit of, had it gathered momentum, coup talk. Interesting, those who are closest to sources, some taking it a bit more seriously than others in terms of there at least having been a sounding out of sorts. And a very interesting observation from Andrea Vance at the weekend, of course, that the Finance Minister, Nicola Willis, was standing right beside the Prime Minister when he made his well-received speech in Upper Hutt last Sunday before last. What's your take on it, Liam? Was it a fishing expedition that could have gathered steam? Does this put it to bed or not? How are you reading what happened the last couple of weeks and the sort of fever that kicked up mid last week?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to put it to bed for this cycle, certainly. But look, here's the thing. It would be completely idiotic. It would be political suicide to do it. It would just be incredible. But that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And of all those MPs in the National Party caucus, I can guarantee you one thing. Each and every one of them believes that they have what it takes to be the Prime Minister. And if the conditions are right, that they could take their shot. And they also have extreme anxiety about missing their shot as time goes on. That's all of them. Now, if they're foolish enough to have a go at it, then what they're going to do is end up hurting themselves. That's true of all parties and all leaderships. Christopher Luxon has some real challenges, and he's got difficulties in terms of very tight polling environment. But it's not like he's Keir Starmer, or even Donald Trump. Like the government's got every good chance of being re-elected. So it was I would say is that what this shows is that personal ambition is never suppressed, even when it's actually in your long-term interest to cool it and to wait longer and to be a team player. I think that the fact is that it was if whatever happened was snuffed out at a very early stage as a sign of strength internally, at least. And I'd be very surprised if we have anything further between now and the election.
It may also indicate some of those strategic decisions, personal strategic decisions that you were referring to, were made by some. Were they saved from themselves, do you think, potentially last week, by it not gathering further momentum, Lianne?
Well, I suspect it may not be completely over. People who know Chris Bishop very well will know that he's not one to give up on anything that's within his line of sight. So I suspect that it may not be over. But leaving all that aside, I think that the challenge that Christopher Luxon has is the reality of the coalition agreement, which is extremely detailed with two parties, where he's really ceded the narrative to ACT and New Zealand First on key strategic issues, and some of them strategic only for those individual parties for the sake of the next election campaign. So I think that he's made a major misstep right at the very beginning of his prime ministerial role, and I think he has conceded far too much in those two documents, and he's going to be playing catch up and whether ever it does actually catch up, that's yet to be seen.
All right. The economy, of course, we're yet to see what transpires and how quickly and how significantly in 2026. A lot is going to be riding on that. To the proposed changes, beginning with regional councillors going and some kind of new committee of mayors taking over the governance role of regional councils. But what's sitting in behind that, Lianne, is a much bigger restructuring, reorganisation of local government coming down the track. Really interested in your interpretation of what's proposed.
Well, it does seem that when you read the discussion document, which is actually an embarrassment, really. It's just got such silly stuff contained within it. But it does say right at the very start, the real change comes with the regional reorganisation plans. So this is a step towards an objective, which is to have local governments amalgamate on a unitary basis, and whether that is a couple of unitary authorities within a region or one for the whole region, as it was in Auckland when Auckland was created as a unitary council. Somebody said to me that the way that they looked at the Auckland reorganisation was that you ended up losing the regional council and losing the local. So you lost both. There was no regional and no local. And when you look at what happened with the Auckland anniversary weekend floods, the individual councils that would have prepared for those because they knew where the problem areas were, they'd lost their muscle memory. That they'd gone, and because the local authorities that were used to dealing with the rivers that flooded and various other things, they ended up suffering a far greater amount of damage than would otherwise have been the case. And that's what worries me. I'd rather that we actually sat down and had a conversation about what the different arms of government should do. Central government, local government, and is there a case for regional government in between? I mean, pest control, do you really want to do that on a local basis, or do you want to do that on a regional basis, or is it something that needs to be more nationally focused? I don't know. I think form follows function, and that is the failure of this proposal.
How are you reading it, Liam?
Well, three things. First of all, I have to disclose up front that I do quite a bit of sort of commercial legal work for various local government bodies, and so I got an interest in them continuing to exist. But quite apart from all that, look, I'm also a localism guy, as a lot of conservatives are, right? And so I really endorse everything that Lianne just said. So I'm sorry not to bring more contention into it, but. What this has been proposed is really, it's a centralisation. No matter how much they protest that it isn't, you are dragging more authority upwards and having less underneath. You're making it less democratic. And I totally get that people don't know who the regional councils are, but it's a choice that they have that will be removed from them by sort of making it into a sort of a delegated body. There's always, I think we should always have it on the table that we need to discuss how local government is and whether or not we have too much or not enough. But in 1988, we had 850 local authorities in New Zealand. We now have a tenth of that. Now, 850, that's way too much for a country that at the time would have had barely 3 million people. But 78, there's 78 different concerns around the country. Yeah, I think that there are. And, certainly I would think that anyone who's got a temperament for thinking that local knowledge matters, that local concern matters, that government is best when it governs closest to home, should have some concern about the illusion of efficiencies that you gain through centralisation. We have been through centralisation of government services constantly over the last while. We had it with Polytechs, we've had it with the DHBs. None of them have proved to be a silver bullet. You wear all the costs of the centralisation up front. and the benefits, they either materialize a long time down the track, if at all. So I've got to admit to some skepticism, tainted a little bit, I suppose, by pecuniary interest, but also at a philosophical level too.
Yeah. Very, very interesting, because to your point, Lianne, there's so many tasks that they sort of specialise in. The question is, you can, even if they successfully lose the governance arm, but also I'm just thinking about some of the controversies that some of the city councils have had. And do you really want to give more responsibility and more power to them? There's also conflict of interest issues, but sometimes where they're going to have to be the guardians of themselves. Although this is coinciding with the current government's substantial RMA reforms, I understand we might be seeing the full shape of that legislation before the end of the year as well. Very interesting. Can't get you to disagree on it. I just want to take...
Can I just
please
interrupt? Because you made the point about the RMA reforms are due to be introduced so that we can actually see what is happening here, or what this is, the proposal was designed to deliver. This goes to my point about form follows function. Why on earth can't we see what the different roles are before we are asked to offer an opinion as to how things might change in the future? So I'm not against change. I really feel that we ought to be, as a nation, sitting down having a conversation about what are the different things that different arms of government do. Now, one of the points that's been made most recently is let's look at national government. I mean, look how many government departments or agencies or quangos have been created over the years. Given the size of our population, we never have a conversation about the size of central government, but we need to be thinking about... I know you do, Liam, but I think that why can't we have a conversation about who is best placed to do what? Why don't we have a conversation about this particular function? Who is the best placed organisation to do this? Is it local? Is it a regional thing? And do we then agglomerate the local in order to deliver regionally through a shared services arrangement? I don't mind having that conversation, but please, let's have that conversation.
To be fair, Lianne, there's plenty of water to go under the bridge. At this stage we have a concept, and there's going to be a lot to do. And I hope that, through your columns and things like that, that you contribute all of the insights that you've just shared. It's the worst thing we could do would be for people not to engage and bring their experience and expertise to actually stop people from making foolish mistakes or not realising the implications of what they're doing.
No, I'll tell you the worst thing. The worst thing would be that we would have a change of government next year and then they would reverse everything. So I'd actually rather that we
better
took
keep the government
time.
then. Better keep national
No,
office.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it's the ins and outs of governments coming in, repealing everything, another government coming in, repealing everything. I would rather that this issue around governance is so important that it is something that ought to be debated and essentially accepted on a non-partisan basis. Right. And if we could get to that point, then I think we'd be doing the country a favour.
All right. I think we will see legislation, possibly 2 items of legislation proposed in the very near future in terms of RMA reform. So certainly there will be room for that conversation to continue. Speaking of bipartisanship, are we sneaking ever so closer to it on at least one part of our retirement savings? Gosh, I remember way back at the start of what was then the Cullen Fund, Liam here, no way was National wanting it. I remember having pointed out to me that the $600 million that the government had borrowed in one particular year was exactly the amount that it had put into the super fund. It was very anti these big projects. It was not particularly supportive of KiwiSaver either. But certainly National now seems to be warming not only to this idea, but to bigger contributions. How are you reading it?
Well, necessity forces these types of consensus, doesn't it, really? And I've got to admit, being someone who, over the years, has been fully white-pilled on KiwiSaver, because it is creating, and I have to tell you, as a solicitor, right, when people go to buy their first homes, they withdraw their KiwiSaver, and we see these amounts that people have saved, and granted they're using it for a home now, but I can tell you that saving just otherwise wouldn't exist. we have a looming affordability problem with retirement, and the sooner that we actually start to have a strong consensus on increasing the role of KiwiSaver is going to save us. For my own retirement planning, I am expecting to get very little apart from my own KiwiSaver, and I think most millennials sort of feel the same way. And the actual reform of entitlement is going to either be something that is way in the future when it's too late, too little, too late, but it's too politically toxic is to do KiwiSaver now. So I've got to say I'm on board with it. I think that the problems with the policy that's announced is that it's coming at a time at a cost of living crisis when it's going to take money out of people's pockets. But it's better to do the reform at the wrong time than to never do it at all.
I mean,
so
the
I'm
comparison with Australia is interesting. There are much bigger tax breaks for employers there. The employer makes the entire contribution, I think, but there's a trade-off in terms of taxes. There's a lot of changes. And of course, there is means testing of Australian super. Lianne, Dalziel, is there any prospect that the two biggest parties indeed will seriously come together on some wider super affordability changes, or are we still sort of singing in the wind on that one? What do you think?
Well, when you would look at the history of national super or New Zealand superannuation, I don't think that is going to be an easy topic for either party to...
Well, New Zealand first would be putting the stopper in the jar, probably on either side, right?
That's true. And I think the other issue that often gets left out of this conversation is what about the impact on women? So women in our economy, there is such a thing as a gender pay gap, still exists. Periods of absence from the paid workforce, having children. There are a number of issues that impact on women's ability to earn during the times that they're in the paid workforce, and also absences from the paid workforce, meaning an impact on what they would be able to access in retirement. National Super New Zealand superannuation made a big difference in that regard for a lot of women, and I think this has to be thought about because this is an issue that's come up in our People's Select Committee review of the pay equity changes, where 33 pay equity claims were sort of just scrapped by the government overnight. And this has they all relate to how women are going to be in a position to support themselves in retirement.
Māori are the others who say that we should certainly not be waiting any longer for our super, again because of other health statistics, dying younger, having access to national super for less as well, and one of the most regrettable kind of health inequities that we have. Interesting conversation, so I appreciate your time, both of you. Lianne, Dalziel and Liam Hehir.